The story begins on a quiet Tuesday evening in a bustling city. The streets are alive with the hum of activity, cars honking, people chatting, and the occasional bark of a dog echoing through the alleys. Amidst this chaos stands Marcus Hayes, a man whose calm demeanor contrasts sharply with the world around him. To anyone passing by, Marcus looks like just another face in the crowd. He's dressed casually, wearing a hoodie and jeans, blending perfectly into the urban landscape. But what no one knows is that Marcus isn't who he appears to be. Beneath his unassuming exterior lies a highly skilled operative, a decorated agent working for the Central Intelligence Agency. For months, Marcus has been undercover, tasked with dismantling one of the most dangerous human trafficking rings in the country. It's a mission that requires patience, precision, and nerves of steel. Every day he walks a tightrope, balancing between his real identity and the persona he's created. His cover? A street-smart hustler trying to make ends meet. It's a role Marcus plays flawlessly, down to the way he talks, moves, and interacts with others. But tonight, something feels different. There's an unease in the air, a tension Marcus can't quite place. As he leans against a lamppost near a dimly lit corner, Marcus keeps one eye on the road and the other on the shadows around him. He's waiting for someone, an informant who promised to deliver crucial information about the trafficking ring's operations. This meeting could be the breakthrough Marcus has been working toward for months. Yet, as the minutes tick by, his instincts start to tingle. Something isn't right. Suddenly, the distant wail of sirens pierces the night. At first, Marcus doesn't think much of it. Sirens are a common sound in this part of town. But then he notices the flashing red and blue lights growing brighter. In his peripheral vision, two police cruisers screech to a halt nearby, blocking off the street. Out step four officers, their movements brisk and purposeful. They glance around, scanning the area until their eyes land on Marcus. "Hey, you!" one of the officers shouts, pointing at him. "Hands where we can see them." Marcus freezes for a split second, his mind racing. Should he comply? Should he try to explain? No. Revealing his true identity now would jeopardize everything he's worked so hard to achieve. Instead, he raises his hands slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. "I'm not armed," he says calmly, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "What's going on?" The officers don't answer. Instead, they move closer, surrounding him. One of them, a tall man with a stern expression, narrows, his eyes suspiciously. "We got a call about a suspicious individual hanging around here," he says gruffly. "That's you." Marcus swallows hard but maintains his composure. Suspicious? He's done nothing wrong, yet. Still, he knows how quickly things can spiral out of control in situations like this. "I'm just waiting for someone," he explains, keeping his tone neutral. No big deal. But the officer isn't convinced. He steps forward, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. "Turn around," he orders. "Now." Reluctantly, Marcus obeys, turning his back to the officers. As they begin patting him down, his heart pounds in his chest. He feels a mix of fear and frustration bubbling up inside him. Fear because he's unarmed and outnumbered. Frustration because he knows exactly why this is happening. It's not about what he's done. It's about how he looks. A black man standing alone in a rough neighborhood. That's all the reason some people need to assume the worst. The search turns up nothing incriminating, at least not at first. Then one of the officers reaches into Marcus's jacket pocket and pulls out his earpiece. It's a small device, barely noticeable, but in this context, it raises eyebrows. "What's this?" the officer demands, holding it up for the others to see. "It's personal," Marcus replies cautiously. He can't tell them the truth that it's part of his surveillance equipment. Doing so would blow his cover completely. The officer snorts, clearly unconvinced. "Personal, huh? And what about these?" he adds, pulling out a stack of fake IDs and burner phones from Marcus's other pocket. Each item only deepens their suspicion. Marcus tries to stay calm, but the situation is escalating rapidly. He watches as the officers exchange glances, their body language shifting from cautious to hostile. One of them mutters under his breath, "This guy's trouble." Another steps forward, grabbing Marcus's arm roughly. "You're coming with us," he growls. It's in this moment that Marcus realizes his cover is slipping away. If he doesn't act fast, everything, the months of preparation, the countless hours spent building trust within the trafficking ring, will be for nothing. Quietly, almost imperceptibly, he whispers a code word into his earpiece, hoping his handler hears it. It's a long shot, but it's the only chance he has left. As the officers snap handcuffs onto his wrists, Marcus closes his eyes briefly, bracing himself for what comes next. He knows the stakes are higher than ever, but even as uncertainty looms over him, one thing is clear. Whatever happens next will leave everyone involved stunned. The tension in the air was thick as Marcus stood handcuffed, his hands secured tightly behind his back. The officers loomed over him, their expressions a mix of suspicion and hostility. One of them, a burly man with a shaved head, held up the earpiece they'd found in Marcus's pocket. "What is this thing?" he demanded again, his voice louder this time, almost accusatory. "It's nothing," Marcus replied calmly, though his mind raced. He knew that revealing the truth would mean blowing his cover entirely, but staying silent wasn't helping either. The officers were growing more agitated by the second, their patience wearing thin. Another officer, younger and visibly nervous, chimed in, "You're not telling us everything, are you? Who are you, really?" Marcus hesitated, weighing his options. He couldn't risk exposing his mission, but he also needed to de-escalate the situation before it spiraled further out of control. "Look," he said, his tone measured and deliberate. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I'm just waiting for someone, that's all." But his words fell on deaf ears. The lead officer, clearly frustrated, stepped closer, his face inches from Marcus's. "Don't play games with us," he snapped. "We know your type. Always up to something shady." His tone carried an edge of prejudice, one that Marcus had heard too many times before. It wasn't about evidence or logic. It was about assumptions based solely on appearances. As the confrontation intensified, Marcus caught sight of a flicker of movement in the distance. At first, he thought it might be his imagination, but then he heard it, the unmistakable roar of an engine speeding toward them. A sleek black SUV screeched to a halt mere feet away, its tires squealing against the pavement. The sudden arrival startled everyone, including the officers who instinctively reached for their weapons. Out of the vehicle stepped a woman dressed in a sharp suit, her presence commanding immediate attention. This was Agent Rachel Monroe, Marcus's supervisor at the CIA. She exuded authority, her piercing gaze scanning the scene before settling on the officers. Without hesitation, she raised her hand, signaling for her team to follow her lead. Behind her emerged several agents clad in tactical gear, their vests emblazoned with bold letters spelling out CIA. Rachel wasted no time. "Stand down," she barked, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "This man is a federal agent under my command. Release him immediately." The officers froze, their faces pale with shock. For a moment there was complete silence, broken only by the faint hum of the idling SUV. Then one of the officers stammered, We didn't know. He looked like..." His voice trailed off awkwardly, unable to finish the sentence. The implication hung heavy in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. Rachel's expression hardened. She stepped forward, closing the gap between herself and the officers. "Looks aren't evidence," she said sharply, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You've just detained a key asset in a high-priority investigation. Do you understand what that means?" The officers exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado melting away under Rachel's steely glare. One of them, the youngest, swallowed, audibly, his hands trembling slightly as he fumbled with the keys to unlock Marcus's handcuffs. As the metal restraints clicked open, Marcus flexed his wrists, wincing slightly from the pressure they'd left behind. He remained silent, his eyes locked on Rachel, silently thanking her for her impeccable timing. Rachel turned to address Marcus, directly. "Are you okay?" she asked, her tone softening ever so slightly. Marcus nodded, though his jaw was clenched tight. He wanted to say something, to express how furious and humiliated he felt, but now wasn't the time. Instead, he simply muttered, "I'm fine." Rachel nodded once, then turned back to the officers. She pulled out official documentation, a badge, identification papers, and a letter of authorization, and handed them over. "This should clear things up," she said curtly. "If you have any questions, feel free to contact our headquarters. But for now, we need to get back to work." The officers accepted the documents reluctantly, their faces flushed with embarrassment. One of them mumbled an apology, though it lacked sincerity. "We were just doing our job," he said weakly, as if trying to justify their actions. Rachel didn't respond. Instead, she gestured for Marcus to join her at the SUV. As they walked away, leaving the officers standing awkwardly beside their patrol cars, Marcus couldn't help but glance back. The look on their faces was a mixture of shame and disbelief. They hadn't expected this outcome, not in a million years. And while part of Marcus felt a fleeting sense of satisfaction, another part of him was weighed down by the same old frustration. How many times would he have to prove himself before people stopped judging him based on the color of his skin? Once inside the SUV, Rachel closed the door firmly behind them. The vehicle was quiet except for the low hum of the engine. Marcus leaned back against the seat, letting out a slow breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Rachel studied him carefully, her sharp eyes noting the tension in his posture and the storm brewing in his gaze. "That could have gone worse," she said finally, breaking the silence. Her tone was light, almost casual, but Marcus knew she understood the gravity of what had just happened. "Could have gone better too," Marcus replied, his voice tight. He stared out the window, watching as the city blurred past. Despite the relief of being rescued, he couldn't shake the sting of the officers' words and actions. They hadn't seen him as a person. They'd seen him as a stereotype, a threat. And that hurt more than anything else. Rachel placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You handled it well," she said. "Better than most would have in your position. But I know this isn't easy for you." Marcus didn't respond right away. He appreciated Rachel's support, but words weren't enough to erase the weight of what he'd just endured. Still, he managed a small nod. "Thanks," he murmured, "for showing up when you did." Rachel gave him a slight smile. "That's what we're here for," she said. "Now, let's focus on finishing this mission. We've got bigger problems to deal with." As the SUV sped off into the night, Marcus allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The incident with the police had been unsettling, but it also reinforced his determination. He wasn't going to let ignorance or prejudice stand in the way of justice. If anything, it fueled his resolve to see this mission through to the end. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them head-on. The aftermath of the botched arrest left a bitter taste in Marcus's mouth, but he couldn't afford to dwell on it for long. As the SUV sped through the city streets, Rachel turned her attention to the road ahead, both literally and figuratively. "We need to regroup," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This incident has put us behind schedule and we can't afford any more delays." Marcus nodded silently, still processing everything that had happened. He knew Rachel was right. They had a mission to complete, and there was no room for distractions. But as much as he tried to push aside the anger and frustration bubbling inside him, it lingered like a shadow. The way the officers had treated him wasn't just careless. It was symptomatic of something deeper, something systemic. And while he understood that now wasn't the time to unpack those feelings, they gnawed at him relentlessly. Rachel seemed to sense his inner turmoil. After a few moments of silence, she glanced at him briefly before focusing back on the road. "You want to talk about it?" she asked, her tone softer than usual. Marcus hesitated. Talking about it wouldn't change what had happened, but maybe saying it out loud would help him process it. "It's not the first time something like this has happened," he admitted finally, his voice low and measured. "Every time I step into a situation like this, I know there's a chance someone will see me as a threat before they see me as a person. Doesn't matter if I'm wearing a badge or not, it's always the same." Rachel listened intently, her expression thoughtful. I wish I could tell you things are different, Marcus, she said after a pause. But the truth is they're not. Not yet, anyway. What those officers did today, it wasn't just ignorance, it was prejudice, plain and simple. And it's infuriating because it doesn't just hurt individuals. It undermines trust, cooperation, and progress. Her words struck a chord with Marcus. He appreciated that she didn't sugarcoat the reality of the situation. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that these conversations, no matter how honest or well-meaning, often led nowhere. What good does talking about it do? He asked, his tone tinged with frustration. People say they understand, but nothing changes. They go back to their routines and life moves on. For them. For me, it's a constant reminder that I have to work twice as hard to prove myself, even when I shouldn't have to. Rachel sighed deeply, her grip tightening, slightly on the steering wheel. You're absolutely right, she conceded. Talk alone won't fix anything, but action might. Look, Marcus, I know this job isn't easy for you. Hell, it's not easy for anyone. But what you're doing matters, not just for this case, but for the bigger picture. You're showing people that someone who looks like you can be trusted, respected, and valued. That's powerful. And yeah, it sucks that you shouldn't have to carry that burden. But maybe, just maybe, you're planting seeds that will grow over time. Marcus mulled over her words, letting them sink in. He wanted to believe her, to think that his sacrifices weren't in vain, but skepticism tugged at him. Even if that's true, he said quietly, it doesn't make days like today hurt any less. No, it doesn't, Rachel agreed. And you shouldn't pretend it doesn't. Acknowledge it, feel it, but don't let it stop you. Use it. Let it remind you why you started this work in the first place. For the first time since the confrontation with the officers, Marcus felt a flicker of resolve reignite within him. Maybe Rachel was onto something. Maybe this wasn't just about catching criminals or dismantling trafficking rings. It was about proving that justice could transcend prejudice. If he could rise above the biases stacked against him, perhaps others would follow suit. It was a lofty goal, but Marcus had never been one to shy away from a challenge. As the SUV pulled into a secure location, a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city, Rachel parked the vehicle and turned off the engine. She unbuckled her seatbelt and faced Marcus directly. Listen, she said, her voice steady and earnest. We've got a lot of work to do. This trafficking ring isn't going to take itself down, but don't lose sight of the fact that you're making a difference. Every step forward counts, no matter how small it feels in the moment. Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing her words. He knew she was right. Dwelling on the past wouldn't change it, but moving forward gave him a chance to shape the future. With renewed determination, he opened the car door and stepped out into the cool night air. The warehouse loomed before them, its dimly lit interior buzzing with activity. Other agents were already hard at work, reviewing intel, mapping out strategies, and preparing for the next phase of the operation. Inside, Marcus joined the team gathered around a large table covered with maps, photos, and documents. At the center of the display was a photograph of the human trafficking ring's leader, a ruthless man known only by his alias, Viper. His face was obscured by shadows, but his reputation spoke volumes. Viper ran a sprawling network that spanned multiple states, preying on vulnerable individuals and exploiting them for profit. Dismantling his operation wouldn't be easy, but Marcus was determined to see it through. Rachel took charge of the briefing, her authoritative presence commanding everyone's attention. Thanks to Marcus's efforts, she began, nodding toward him, we've identified several key players in Viper's organization. We also know where they'll be meeting tomorrow night, a heavily guarded compound on the edge of town. This is our shot, our best chance to strike. The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. Tomorrow's raid would be risky, requiring precision and coordination. Failure wasn't an option, not when so many lives were at stake. Marcus studied the map carefully, committing every detail to memory. He knew the risks involved, but he also knew the stakes. This wasn't just about taking down a criminal empire. It was about sending a message that no one, regardless of power or influence, was untouchable. As the meeting wrapped up, Marcus lingered behind, staring at the photo of Viper. There was something unsettling about the man's anonymity, as if he thrived in the shadows, untouchable and unseen. But Marcus refused to let fear dictate his actions. Instead, he focused on the faces of the victims, the men, women, and children trapped in Viper's web. Their suffering fueled his resolve, reminding him why he'd chosen this path in the first place. Rachel approached him once the others had dispersed. "You ready for this?" she asked, her tone gentle but probing. Marcus met her gaze, his eyes unwavering. "I've been ready," he replied firmly. "Let's finish this." With that, they both turned their attention to the task at hand. The hours passed quickly as they finalized plans, double-checked equipment, and rehearsed every possible scenario. By the time dawn broke, exhaustion weighed heavily on everyone, but there was no time to rest. The clock was ticking and the mission awaited. As Marcus prepared for what lay ahead, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The events of the previous night had tested him in ways he hadn't anticipated, but they'd also strengthened his resolve. He wasn't just fighting for justice. He was fighting for a world where people like him wouldn't have to prove their worth over and over again. It was a daunting vision, but Marcus believed it was possible. And as long as he kept pushing forward, he knew he was one step closer to making it a reality. The raid on the human trafficking ring's compound was set to take place at midnight, but hours before the operation began, Marcus found himself pacing nervously in a dimly lit room. The warehouse buzzed with activity as agents double-checked their gear, reviewed blueprints of the compound, and rehearsed strategies one last time. Despite the meticulous planning, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something could go wrong. His mind kept drifting back to the botched arrest, the way the officers had judged him without knowing who he really was. It wasn't just frustration eating at him. It was the weight of knowing that his identity would always be a factor in how people saw him, no matter what he achieved. Rachel noticed his unease from across the room. She walked over, her boots echoing softly against the concrete floor. "You okay?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp with concern. Marcus stopped pacing and sighed. "I'm fine," he said, though the tightness in his jaw betrayed his words. "Just thinking." "About earlier?" Rachel guessed, already knowing the answer. When Marcus nodded, she leaned against the table beside him. "Look, I know you're carrying a lot right now, but tonight isn't about proving anything to anyone else. It's about saving lives, real lives. That's what matters most." Her words struck a chord with Marcus. She was right. This wasn't about vindication or making a statement. It was about dismantling an evil organization that had destroyed countless lives. Still, he couldn't help but wonder if moments like these were opportunities to push for bigger change. If the media got wind of what happened during the arrest, maybe it could spark a conversation about bias within law enforcement. Maybe it could force people to confront uncomfortable truths they'd rather ignore. As if reading his thoughts, Rachel added, "If you want to use this moment to shine a light on systemic issues, we can make it happen, but don't let it distract you from the mission. Focus first on taking down Viper. Everything else comes after." Marcus appreciated her honesty. He trusted Rachel not only as a colleague but as someone who genuinely understood the complexities of his position. With renewed clarity, he nodded. "Let's do this," he said firmly. "We've got work to finish." By the time night fell, the team was ready. Dressed in tactical gear, armed with weapons and communication devices, they loaded into unmarked vans and headed toward the outskirts of the city. The journey was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Each agent knew the risks involved. The compound was heavily guarded, and Viper's men weren't amateurs. One misstep could mean disaster. When they arrived, the scene was eerily quiet. The compound, a sprawling brick structure surrounded by high walls and barbed wire, loomed ominously under the pale glow of the moonlight. Marcus scanned the perimeter through binoculars, his training kicking in as he assessed potential entry points. "There are guards stationed at the front gate," he whispered into his headset. "Two on patrol near the east wall, Another 3. Inside the building, based on thermal imaging, Rachel acknowledged his report. Stick to the plan, she instructed. Team Alpha will breach from the north side, Beta will cover the rear exits, Gamma stays outside as backup. No heroics, Marcus. We clear? Crystal, Marcus replied, though his heart raced. He knew the stakes were higher than ever. Failure wasn't an option, not when so many innocent lives depended on their success. At exactly midnight, the operation commenced. Team Alpha moved swiftly, scaling the wall using grappling hooks and slipping into the shadows undetected. Marcus led the charge, his movements precise and calculated. Years of experience guided him as he navigated the treacherous terrain, avoiding detection while keeping his team safe. Inside the compound, chaos erupted as alarms blared and guards scrambled to respond to the intrusion. Gunfire echoed through the halls as the teams engaged with Viper's men. Marcus stayed focused, his training overriding fear as he returned, fire and advanced deeper into the building. Every step brought them closer to their target, Viper himself. According to intel, he was holed up in a fortified office on the second floor, likely armed and dangerous. As Marcus reached the staircase leading to the upper level, he paused briefly to catch his breath. His earpiece crackled with updates from the other teams. East Wing secured, came a voice. No sign of hostages yet. Keep searching, Rachel ordered. Victims are priority number 1. Marcus nodded to himself and continued climbing the stairs. Reaching the top, he signaled for his teammates to fan out and secure the hallway. Room by room, they cleared each space, finding evidence of the horrors that had taken place within those walls. Chains bolted to the floor, makeshift cells, and discarded personal belongings painted a grim picture of captivity and exploitation. Finally, they reached the office. Marcus kicked open the door, weapon raised only to find it empty. Frustration bubbled up inside him, but then he spotted a laptop left running on the desk. A video feed displayed live footage of another location, a secondary hideout. Viper had escaped, but not entirely. The new coordinates gave them a lead. We need to move fast, Marcus said into his headset. He's onto us, but we can still catch him. Rachel agreed. Fall back to the vans. Regroup and redeploy. Back at the warehouse, the team celebrated a partial victory. Dozens of victims had been rescued, their faces etched with relief and gratitude. Local authorities arrived to transport the survivors to safety, while forensic experts combed through the compound for evidence. News outlets quickly picked up the story, praising the operation as a major blow to organized crime. Yet, amidst the applause, Marcus remained subdued. Later that evening, Rachel approached him as he stood alone, staring at photos pinned to a bulletin board. They depicted some of the victims they'd saved, young faces filled with hope despite the trauma they'd endured. You did good today, Rachel said softly. Real good. Marcus didn't respond immediately. After a long pause, he finally spoke. It's not enough, he admitted. We got lucky this time, but how many others are still out there? How many more will suffer because we couldn't stop it sooner? Rachel placed a hand on his shoulder. Change doesn't happen overnight, Marcus. What you did today saves lives and inspires others to keep fighting. Don't underestimate the power of that. He nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. For all the challenges he faced, both personal and professional, Marcus knew one thing, for certain. Giving up wasn't an option. There was too much at stake. As dawn broke over the horizon, casting golden light across the city, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The battle wasn't over, but every step forward mattered. And, for now, that was enough. The days following the raid were a whirlwind of activity. Marcus and his team worked tirelessly to piece together the information they'd recovered from Viper's compound. The laptop had provided critical intel, including the coordinates of the secondary hideout, a remote farmhouse located deep in the countryside. It was clear that Viper hadn't anticipated such a swift response. He'd left behind clues that would ultimately lead to his downfall. But Marcus knew better than to underestimate him. Viper was cunning, ruthless, and always one step ahead. If they wanted to catch him, they'd need to act quickly and decisively. As plans for a second raid began taking shape, Marcus found himself wrestling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, there was a sense of triumph in what they'd already accomplished. Dozens of victims had been rescued, their lives reclaimed from the clutches of an unimaginable nightmare. Families reunited, tears shed, and stories shared. It was a reminder of why he'd chosen this path in the first place. Yet on the other hand, the arrest incident still lingered in his mind like a shadow. The way those officers had treated him wasn't just a personal affront. It was a symptom of a much larger issue. And while Marcus understood that dismantling systemic bias wouldn't happen overnight, he couldn't ignore the opportunity staring him in the face. During a debriefing session at the CIA headquarters, Marcus sat quietly as Rachel updated the team on their progress. Maps, documents, and surveillance photos covered the walls, each detail meticulously analyzed. When Rachel finished speaking, she turned to Marcus. "Your thoughts?" she asked, knowing full well that he often saw angles others missed. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "We've got Viper on the run," he began, his voice steady but charged with conviction. "But we also have something else. Attention. People are talking about this raid. Reporters, activists, even politicians are calling it a turning point in the fight against human trafficking. What if we use that momentum to shine a light on the bigger picture?" Rachel raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." "This isn't just about catching Viper," Marcus continued. "It's about exposing the system that allows people like him to thrive. Corruption, exploitation, prejudice, they're all connected. If we release some of the evidence we've gathered, not just about Viper, but about how these networks operate, we can force people to confront the truth. Maybe then, conversations will start happening. Real ones." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed his words. Some nodded approvingly, while others exchanged skeptical glances. One agent spoke up cautiously. "That's risky territory, Marcus. Leaking sensitive information could compromise our operations, or worse, put lives at risk." "I'm not suggesting we dump everything online," Marcus clarified. "But we can share enough to spark outrage without jeopardizing our mission. Let's give the public a reason to demand change. Once Viper is behind bars, his empire won't crumble unless people understand the roots of the problem." Chelner considered his proposal carefully. After a moment, she nodded. "It's bold," she admitted, "and dangerous. But I think you're right. This could be our chance to push for real reform, not just within law enforcement, but across the board. Let's make it happen." Over the next few days, Marcus worked closely with Rachel and a small group of trusted agents to curate the information they planned to leak. They sifted through hours of surveillance footage, intercepted communications and financial records, selecting pieces that painted a damning portrait of the trafficking ring's operations. Every detail was vetted to ensure accuracy and minimize collateral damage. Meanwhile, Marcus reached out to contacts in the media, individuals known for their integrity and commitment to justice. He trusted them to handle the story responsibly, framing it not just as a crime exposé but as a call to action. When the leaked information hit the headlines, the reaction was immediate and explosive. News outlets across the country ran front page, stories detailing the inner workings of Viper's network, the bribes paid to officials, the exploitation of vulnerable communities, and the staggering scale of human suffering involved. Public outrage reached fever pitch, prompting protests, petitions, and demands for accountability. Lawmakers scrambled to address the growing pressure, introducing bills aimed at strengthening anti-trafficking laws and increasing funding for victim support programs. The timing couldn't have been better. As public scrutiny intensified, so did the pressure on local authorities to cooperate fully with the CIA. For months, Marcus had faced resistance from certain factions within law enforcement who viewed federal intervention as a threat to their autonomy. Now, however, those same agencies were eager to collaborate, desperate to distance themselves from any association with corruption or misconduct. Resources once denied to Marcus's team were suddenly made available, giving them the tools they needed to track down Viper once and for all. With renewed determination, Marcus devised a plan to capture Viper at the farmhouse. Using satellite imagery and drone reconnaissance, the team identified weak points in the property's defenses. Guards patrolled the perimeter, but their numbers were fewer than expected, a sign that Viper's operation was crumbling under the weight of exposure. Still, Marcus knew better than to underestimate his adversary. This final confrontation would require precision, coordination, and nerves of steel. On the night of the raid, the air was thick with tension. Under the cover of darkness, Marcus and his team approached the farmhouse, moving silently through dense woods. Each step brought them closer to their target, adrenaline coursing through their veins. As they breached the outer fence, Marcus signaled for his teammates to take positions around the house. Inside, the faint glow of lanterns illuminated the windows, casting eerie shadows on the ground. Marcus led the charge, kicking open the front door and storming inside. The scene was chaotic, guards firing blindly, furniture overturned, and the acrid smell of gunpowder filling the air. Despite the chaos, Marcus remained focused, his training guiding every move. Room by room, they cleared the space, closing in on Viper's location. Finally, they reached the basement, where the man himself stood cornered, clutching a weapon. "Drop it!" Marcus shouted, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Viper hesitated, his eyes darting wildly as he searched for an escape route. But there was none. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered his weapon and raised his hands. "It's over," Marcus said, holstering his gun and stepping forward to cuff him. As the metal snapped shut around Viper's wrists, a wave of relief washed over Marcus. Months of hard work, sacrifice, and perseverance had finally paid off. Justice had been served, but the battle wasn't over yet. Back at the warehouse, the team celebrated their victory. Laughter and cheers filled the air as agents embraced one another, sharing in the triumph. But Marcus stood apart, watching silently as dawn broke over the horizon. He felt proud of what they'd achieved, but he also knew that the fight for equality and justice extended far beyond this moment. The arrests, the raids, the leaks, they were steps toward a larger goal. A world where no one had to prove their worth based on the color of their skin. A world where trust and cooperation replaced fear and division. Rachel joined him, her presence grounding him. "You did it," she said simply, pride evident in her tone. Marcus shook his head. "Not me. Us. And it's not done yet." She smiled, knowingly. "No, it's not. But you're making a difference, Marcus. Don't ever forget that." As the sun rose higher, bathing the city in golden light, Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of hope. Progress might be slow, but it was possible. And as long as he kept pushing forward, he knew he was part of something bigger than himself. Something worth fighting for. The days following Viper's arrest were a blur of activity. The media frenzy reached new heights as details of the operation unfolded, painting Marcus and his team as heroes who had dismantled one of the most dangerous human trafficking rings in recent history. Reporters clamored for interviews, activists hailed the mission as a turning point in the fight against modern slavery, and lawmakers scrambled to draft legislation aimed at preventing such atrocities from happening again. Yet, amidst the accolades and applause, Marcus remained grounded. He knew that while capturing Viper was a significant victory, it was only one battle in a much larger war. The public reaction to the leaked information had been nothing short of transformative. Protests erupted across the country, demanding accountability not just from traffickers but also from those who enabled them: corrupt officials, complicit businesses, and even law enforcement agencies that turned a blind eye. The spotlight shone brightly on systemic issues, forcing institutions to confront uncomfortable truths about bias, prejudice, and inequality. For Marcus, this was where the real work began. It wasn't enough to take down one criminal empire. He wanted to dismantle the structures that allowed such empires to exist in the first place. One morning, Marcus found himself sitting in a quiet corner of a bustling cafe, sipping black coffee as he scrolled through news articles on his phone. Headlines screamed about justice served and heroes among us, but what caught his attention were the opinion pieces calling for reform. Writers dissected the leaked evidence, connecting the dots between corruption, exploitation, and racial bias. One article in particular stood out. It highlighted the botched arrest incident, framing it not as an isolated event, but as part of a broader pattern of systemic racism within policing. The author argued that Marcus's story underscored the urgent need for change, not just in how marginalized communities were treated, but in how society as a whole viewed race and identity. Marcus set his phone down, lost in thought. He'd always known that his experiences weren't unique, that countless others faced similar challenges every day. But seeing his story spark conversations about systemic reform filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about vindication or recognition. It was about creating a future where no one had to endure what he had, where trust replaced suspicion and opportunities were based on merit rather than preconceived notions. Later that afternoon, Marcus met with Rachel at the precinct. They were there to debrief with local authorities, many of whom now approached him with a mix of respect and contrition. Gone were the hostile stares and dismissive attitudes. Instead, officers greeted him warmly, shaking his hand and thanking him for his service. Some even apologized for their earlier behavior, acknowledging the role bias had played in their actions. While Marcus appreciated their efforts, he knew apologies alone wouldn't solve the problem. Real change required action and commitment. During the meeting, Rachel addressed the group, her tone firm yet constructive. "What happened with Agent Hayes was unacceptable," she said, glancing briefly at Marcus before continuing. "But it's also an opportunity, a chance to learn, grow, and improve. Bias doesn't disappear overnight, but awareness is the first step toward progress." The officers nodded solemnly, some taking notes as she outlined steps they could take to address these issues. Mandatory anti-bias training, community outreach programs, and increased transparency were just a few suggestions. Marcus listened intently, impressed by Rachel's ability to balance criticism with encouragement. She wasn't pointing fingers. She was offering solutions. After the meeting, Marcus lingered behind, speaking privately with a few officers who seemed genuinely interested in making amends. One of them, a young woman named Detective Alvarez, pulled him aside. "I read about your case," she admitted, her voice tinged with admiration. "You handled everything with so much grace. I can't imagine how hard that must have been." Marcus smiled faintly. "It wasn't easy," he replied honestly. "But it made me realize something important. Change starts with understanding. If we want to build trust, we have to see each other as people, not stereotypes." Detective Alvarez nodded thoughtfully. "That's something I'll carry with me moving forward," she said. "Thank you for everything." As Marcus left the precinct, he felt a flicker of hope. Conversations like these reminded him that progress was possible, even if it came slowly. And while he couldn't single-handedly erase centuries of injustice, he could contribute to a movement that sought to do just that. In the weeks that followed, Marcus threw himself into advocacy work, using his platform to amplify voices often ignored or silenced. He spoke at conferences, wrote op-eds, and partnered with organizations dedicated to combating human trafficking and promoting social justice. His message was simple yet powerful. Justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoers. It's about creating systems that protect everyone equally. Rachel joined him at several events, proud to see her protégé stepping into a leadership role. "You're becoming more than an agent," she told him one evening after a particularly impactful speech. "You're becoming a symbol of hope." Marcus chuckled softly, brushing off the compliment. "I'm just doing my job," he said modestly. "If sharing my story helps someone else, then it's worth it." His humility only added to his appeal. People admired not just his achievements, but his willingness to keep pushing for a better world. Even as accolades poured in, Marcus stayed, focused on the bigger picture. Awards and recognition were nice, but they weren't the end goal. The real prize was a society where no one had to prove their worth based on anything other than their character. Months later, Marcus stood outside the precinct once again, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in hues of orange and pink. The streets buzzed with life, a testament to resilience and renewal. He thought back to the night when everything had nearly gone wrong, the botched arrest, the confrontation, the doubt that had clouded his mind. So much had changed since then, not just for him, but for the world around him. A young boy playing. Nearby caught his eye, tossing a basketball into a makeshift hoop. His laughter echoed through the air, pure and unburdened. Marcus smiled, feeling a surge of optimism. That boy represented the future, a generation raised on the lessons learned from the past, a generation that might grow up in a world where equality wasn't just an ideal but a reality. As the sky darkened and stars began to twinkle above, Marcus took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill his lungs. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but he was ready to face them head-on. After all, progress wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence. And as long as he kept fighting, he knew he was part of something greater than himself. With renewed determination, Marcus turned and walked away, disappearing into the vibrant tapestry of the city. The road ahead would be long, but he carried with him the belief that even the smallest actions could spark monumental change. And in that belief he found strength, purpose, and hope.